Amsterdam. It's a big pleasure being here today. Put your phones on silent and your phasers on stun. There you go. Some good energy this morning, huh? There's some great provocations in the keynotes. Very tasty lunch. You guys have got great bread in this city. Delicious. So hoping to keep some of that energy rolling. My name is Mike. I'm from a company called Xolvio. I forgot to take my headphones off, as I always do. I did that going through security, and the TSA was none too happy with me. We've been around GraphQL kind of since the beginning. We were the original professional services partner for Apollo, like way back in the day. But we've had the pleasure of working with a number of different GraphQL platform providers and adjacent products, Escape, GraphBase, just to name a few. It's nice to be part of such like a vibrant and evolving ecosystem. We've evolved a little bit over the years. One thing that we've gotten more and more interested in is event sourcing, especially the way that it can be combined with GraphQL as a technology and an ecosystem for big effect. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. It's mostly going to be about sort of process, approach, and technology. I'm not going to put up a lot of code, or any code for that matter. There's definitely going to be no live demos, which I've learned from experience do not work well with me. I did wear the loudest shirt that I have available to me, so you could find me easily to talk later. Somebody beat me to the loudest outfit prize, though. And I think he probably wore it better, so let's just stay at that. So this is the title of the talk to you here, ES plus GraphQL equals heart. This equation was first published in an academic paper from the University of Liechtenstein about 3 months ago. For those of you, I'm just kidding, that's not true. Those of you who don't follow the academic literature on this topic, I'm going to help sort of break it down in parts so we know that what we're talking about. Let's start with the obvious one, GraphQL. Show of hands, anybody who doesn't know what GraphQL is? Nobody? Okay, good, right? Definitely would be a good conference to learn, but the rest of this is not going to make a whole lot of sense if you don't know what GraphQL is. Just going to assume everybody understands basic concepts, federation, inquiries, mutations, all that kind of good stuff. It was kind of in the name of the conference, so I thought I could get away with this one. Right, that covers the GraphQL. Let's try another part, love, right? I know that this is not normally a subject for academic talks, the nature of love, but just quickly, let's hit on it. Truly, it's a timeless mystery that we all must explore in our own way, right? What do I mean by love in this specific case, though, right? So let me just clarify my meaning. My spouse and I, who share a great love, have a love of board games and Dungeons and Dragons in particular. I remember this particular box set. I don't know if any of you guys are the same age as me, but while killing giant reptiles and stealing their gold can be the basis of love, that's not exactly what I mean right now. Another basis for love is working together to achieve something. I thought we were in this beautiful nautical setting. I might throw together something that was a little bit more seafaring. It's traveling in the right direction, but not quite what I mean. In this case, I'm talking about compatibility, things that go together that just work in combination with each other. Example of a finely tuned machine parts that connect, right? What I'm trying to say is that these things are compatible, and hopefully we'll be able to convince you of that. Okay, so from the original equation, just one term left to explain. ES, in this case, I mean event sourcing. This isn't something new. I didn't invent it. It's been around for a while. It does have a way of starting arguments somehow. It's one of these subject areas that people like to fight about on the internet. So rather than have some sort of explanation of what is the sort of objectively correct way of approaching event sourcing, I think I'm just going to define what I mean by event sourcing, taking a hint from my good friend, anybody? Voltaire? Good night, guys. No, just kidding, yeah. Who said, you could pretty much discuss anything as long as you define your terms. So let me quickly define my terms. For the purposes of this discussion, and for that purpose only, you're doing event sourcing if you're storing your data as domain events. Your domain events are immutable. Your domain events are in strict time order. And you're using the CQRS architecture pattern. Now let me dive in each one of those in turn just a little bit. Start with domain events. Domain events are just building blocks for an event source system. They're a named thing and a collection of data values that are relevant to that thing, right? They're almost always named in this noun past tense verb form, right? So cart created, item added. Sometimes you add a little prepositional phrase, not to get too like grammar nerdy on everybody in this environment. Like item added to cart, item removed from cart, right? And domain events are meant to record something of significance in your domain or problem space that has occurred. Right? I'm recording something that happened. Right? And I'm recording these the way that I would record lines in a database or documents in a document store, any other persistent form of data storage, right? This is the unit of data storage within an event source system is a domain event, right? There are some things that are not domain events, so it's worth like taking a few things off the table, right? Remember, they're trying to store things only that have significance within the business domain, right? Typically things like page loaded are not really that significant within your business domain, unless I guess your business is like a web browser or something like that, right? This is more of an analytic type event, right? This is also slightly a defense against the extremely overloaded nature of the term event. Right? System notified, right? That's a technical reality, right? This is not something that's happening in your business domain. Just you're sending a message to another system and finding, making sure that it gets notified of this so it can take some sort of action, right? These are things that you might not generally consider to be domain events within an event source application. Moving down the list, events are immutable. It's like a very fancy way of saying you never delete anything, right? So putting it in relational database terms, you would never delete, update, you would definitely not drop. Or can anybody think of another SQL command that causes data to be altered? Upsert. What's that? Truncate. No truncating. That is out of the question. Thank you. Good one. So you have a complete record of everything. Now you might have seen this in the form of like a transaction log. Like a lot of data storage systems have this kind of idea, right? In an event source system, this is like front and center requirement. This is an absolute like design consideration of what you're doing, right? Again, this idea is like pretty old. Like these like old school accounting practices have had ledgers that go back a zillion years, right? And if you even thought about deleting or truncating from this guy's ledger, he would pretty easily go from like mild-mannered accountant to like furious coworker pretty quickly, right? So it's not a new idea, and the reason I highlight that is that it's been working effectively in systems for hundreds, if not thousands of years, right? So we're just carrying forward a practice that's really, I think, justified its existence, right? Your event sourcing, if you're storing these domain events in time order, right? The order in which they occurred and they're all timestamped so you know when they happened, right? Why is that significant, right? Well, if you think of the inexorable flow of time going from left to right, with left being my birth and right being my presumable death. That got a little dark. Sorry. All right. Anyway, time is flowing from left to right. A series of events might be like I created a cart. The cart was created, right? I added an item to the cart, added a different item to the cart, I removed something from the cart. I'm working in an e-commerce space in this example, as you can tell, not like Mario Kart or something like that. At any point in time, you can tell where we are. If you have access to all these events, you know, at this point, the card had 2 events in it. At this part, it had 1. At this part, the discount had been added, right? It's pretty conventional in event source systems to organize these events into like shallow, what we call streams, which relate to a single important entity, in this case, the cart, but it's not necessarily a requirement, right? The important thing to take away from this is that all the events are organized in time and timestamped, right? Okay, here comes a scary part, right? Using the CQRS architecture pattern. Anybody familiar? When I say CQRS, okay, what does it stand for? What's the R? That's the tough one, isn't it? No? Anybody? Responsibility, that's right. Command query responsibility, sorry guys. It's one of these things you hear a lot. For some reason, nobody can ever remember the R. Everybody kind of knows what it means and is also kind of scared of it because it's the kind of things that like guys argue about on the internet. Again, like what's the right way of doing it? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it complicated? Is it not? Whatever. I like to think of it as like the Finnish death metal of architecture patterns. Thank you to ChatGPT for generating this one for me, right? Technically very like complicated and detailed, a little bit scary and dark, but actually like much more positive and life affirming than you thought possible once you dig into it a little bit. I tend to think of it a little bit more like maybe like a real Will Smith hip hop banger from the 90s. Fun, approachable, useful. It doesn't have to be super scary because in fact, it's really not that complicated, right? Like essentially CQRS just means the writer's gonna write, reader's gonna read. You know, is that a Taylor Swift quote? And I have a 14-year-old daughter. In that the movement of your data tends to go in a circle, right? You have a dedicated system, command processors, the C, right? Write things into a write store. Through a process which we'll get into in a moment, things work their way into a read store, your query handlers, Q, your readers, right? They read things back out. User interface is kind of driving this all, putting it state, getting stuff out, right? Simple, straightforward. It's logically simple, I guess, is the idea here. And that's where the real utility in, because we know that things that are logically simple are easy to talk about, easy to collaborate, easy to write specifications, right? And often easy to implement, right? CQRS can be simple, but it can also help you be fast, right? In that it affords you an opportunity to sort of write and forget, right? Put it into the write, forget about it. And then to create multiple versions of what you're going to read. This process is usually called projection, where you take the contents of your event store, create a variety of read models from that, each of which is optimized for some sort of read situation that you care about. Like sometimes this is you just going to need to be fast, right? I need a fast way to read this particular type of data, right? Another one might be that I need a specific format, right? I need PDF files, or I need SQL or whatever. Another one might just be it's convenient for, say, integration with another system. I need SQL for a BI process, whatever. Right? Those are conventionally called read models, right? And then you can have multiple different kinds of query handlers that are dealing with each one of these models, and it's like protocol specifics, right? Again, going out to the interface, right? And so, CQRS could be something like essentially bland and boring, in this case, British cuisine. You take a little Jamie Oliver, who's our CQRS in this scenario, right? And he makes it fast and simple. My wife really loves Jamie Oliver, so I felt that as a little nod to her, I would work him into the presentation. So apologies if that one was kind of shoehorned, right? And that concludes my definition of event sourcing. So this is normally where people start like putting their hands up and yelling like, that's not it, and I wrote a book about that. Right? We can have that discussion at the latter stages of the cocktail party later. Maybe I think would be the right setting. But for now, that's our definition, right? Okay, we're like 12 minutes in and I haven't talked about GraphQL. So this is a conference about GraphQL. Here we are, we're at it. All right. What does this have to do with anything? All right. Okay, those of you who have been listening attentively, which I'm saying is actually really mostly everybody, thankfully, may have noticed some points here where that concept sounds familiar, right? Or that feels like a place where some GraphQL might make some sense, or like, this is resonating with something that I heard earlier in the talk, or maybe you're just kind of thinking forward and you're like, I could use that to solve some sort of problem, right? Those of you who have not been paying attention, like there's usually like a few people who are just like avidly staring at their phone. Don't worry about it. I'll like let you know when to like look up and take a picture and look down, which also happens, unfortunately. But let's talk about the similarities, right? So has anybody ever been part of an event storming session or a event stormer right there? A storming session, or like a formal, proper like domain exploration, right? This activity is almost certainly the #1 consumer of Post-it notes in the universe. Like I've personally gone through billions of them, undertaking this kind of activity, right? But domain modeling is, I think, an essential process in software development these days, and any organization of any size is really thinking in these terms, right? The old scent goes, at least around the Xolvio shop, is that if you do your domain model well, you're going to get your GraphQL schema for free, right? Because this data representation of these kind of entities and relationships, it just sort of falls out of the domain model, right? The same is roughly true of an event source system, in that if you do your domain well, like you design it well, then your selection of domain events, your sort of domain event model, also comes out of that, right? And so the two ideas, like GraphQL representation of your data and orchestration, all that, and the design of this event, it's really kind of two paths that originate from the same place, right? So you can do a little buy one, get one free in doing your domain model right and getting these two potential aspects of a system out of it, right? Coming back to CQRS, I'll just give this one a minute to sink in. You don't have to laugh, just raise your hand if this makes sense to you. No? You got to keep them segregated? The offspring? I had a bet with one of my colleagues as to whether that was going to land, and unfortunately I lost, right? This is a 90s punk rock band that sings a song, You Gotta Keep Them Separated. No, I'll play it later. There's a karaoke thing later, right? It'll be during that. Anyway, okay. GraphQL is already ES the C and the Q, in the sense that it's already responsibility segregated the command and the query, right? I mean, a mutation is just a command, right? It's something that alters state, writes data, changes the lay of the land, right? Wolverine is, of course, a There we go. And then it sounds obvious, of course, but SQL queries are, they're queries. Queries are queries, right? But it's the flip side of the coin, right? So those two concepts are always like super well embedded. The very first thing that you learn about GraphQL, this sort of this architectural separation is, of course, the functional nature of CQRS, right? So that concept is already embedded in the both, right? Okay, so quick actually moment, right? Some of you, there's someone in here I know who's thinking, actually, GraphQL is just CQS, no R. Were you thinking that? You get the prize, okay, good. You can sing the Offspring song with me later at the party. Okay, so technically this is true. Right? I don't dispute this, but I don't want to get too hung up on the distinction, right? So we can talk about that another time. Nonetheless, I think everyone will accept that you can achieve a CQRS architecture using GraphQL and event sourcing. Got it, okay, good. You can make fun of me on the internet later if you like. All right, remember this diagram from before, right? This feels like there's something missing here, right? You got a whole bunch of different kinds of writing and reading going on, and you've got this user interface. And I can't help but think that there's this like a space where, oh, look at that, where does that sucker go? GraphQL, right? Like it's perfect to occupy this position in this event source architecture, CQRS event source architecture, right? Because it sits right there, right? And I mean, one of the sort of unwritten things about event sourcing is that one of the great values is the flexibility, right? That you can change up this tier, the things that are happening here, the way you're writing, what you're writing, as well as the way you're reading, right? Under the hood, we can get into this in a more detailed like event sourcing specific discussion, right? But it's pretty normal to like create a read model, use it, abandon it, create a new one, right? Project, reproject, change it. So the nature of all these things is changing, and then having that GraphQL-based layer there, abstracting, decoupling, doing all the wonderful things that GraphQL can do, makes it an absolute natural pairing for the approach, right? In a world where you're expecting a lot of change, I think GraphQL is a great defense enabler, value adder. Okay, so just to summarize those couple points, right? I think GraphQL and event sourcing, they go really well. They both naturally benefit from an effective domain model, right? That investment that you make in domain modeling pays off both parts of the coin, right? You get double your value. They both naturally tend towards, or already, or by definition, implement a CQRS architecture, right? If that's something that you're attracted to, or you, already doing or getting value out of, great, they work great. And also enables the required decoupling across this sort of data view that we just described, right? So I am from South Carolina, which, as some of you may know, is in the American South. I would say that event sourcing and GraphQL go together like peas and carrots, an expression that you might have heard in Forrest Gump. No? Okay, so getting a little bit more like geographically local, you could say they go together like chocolate and churros, which I think is an expression that comes from Spain. No? A little hyper local, perhaps, we could say they go together like French fries and mayonnaise and onions and sausage and whatever else is in this thing. I think I'm going to try to find one of these later. If anybody knows where you can get them, I'm going to find that exact spot, right? But what I'm saying is that choose your junk food metaphor. They go together really well. And I think you'll agree, right? So the level of compatibility between the two approaches, I think justifies the use of this little heart emoji. Given I am 48 years old and the use of emoji is maybe outside of the normal scope of my kind of cultural reach, I confess it is a desperate attempt to seem a little bit younger. That's the main point that I wanted to make. I'd love to take some questions now if anybody has anything they want to bring up or discuss. I do have some other points to talk about, which I could dive into, but not at the expense of conversation. So did anybody have anything they wanted to throw in or a question to ask? Or did you want to go over any of that? Nobody? Everybody wants the bonus material? Okay, we'll forge on, right? Okay. So these are some ideas that I thought about putting into sort of the main talk, but I wasn't sure were like a really good fit. So I thought, okay, we'll put these in as extra slides and we can kind of talk about them, right? One sort of tactical thing. Some people implement their mutations as like a write and a read, right? You change the data and then you immediately update, give me back my state, right? Normal CQRS architecture, this is a bit of a problem, right? Because you're almost always have an eventually consistent relationship between your write and your read, right? So some sort of built-in delay, right? It's not like a relational data store where you can write, immediately read with this like transactional guarantee. It doesn't work that way, right? That's going to throw off using this tactic, right? Luckily, there is a good way of working with this, right? So instead, what you do is you write, get back a transaction ID at the same time or beforehand, subscribe to the relevant entity, When that change works its way through the eventual consistency, pops back out the other side, right? Then you can manage your needs of the latency between those two operations just operationally, right? So you don't have to have this assumption that it's always going to be instantaneous or effectively instantaneous, right? You could vary it depending on the expectations of different features, different data processes, right? Or you could force it as hard as you want. You can build an event store style system using a relational data store as your event store if you want. It's a little unconventional, but in the case that it is a hard requirement on your system, you could always have that option. So one obvious problem that you can run into that has an obvious and well-tested solution. I didn't come up with this, by the way. I forget the chap's name, but he gave a talk at like 3 years ago here and on this exact like idea, right? So if you want to dive into it in detail, like he's got code examples and a beautiful German accent, which I unfortunately don't have, but I guess you're stuck with my southeastern baritone. When you entertain this sort of idea, these kind of like architecturally complex, exotic, or obscure, at least novel sounding things, you often wonder, is this really ready for enterprise use? I mean, we've got people speaking here and in this audience who are from some of the highest volume enterprises on the internet, right? I would say yes. I mean, like the question, is GraphQL ready for the enterprise is like a question for whatever, 10 years ago. Yes, it certainly is. Event sourcing is more than ready for the prime time. At Xolvio, we work on a number of projects in like the finance sector that are doing this, and they're like famous for their kind of high volume, high reliability demands. There's a supporting ecosystem of products like Current and Exonic that are event store databases that are specifically designed for this kind of thing. And they're more than happy to tell you about how reliable and scalable and clusterable and awesomable they are. I've used most of them, and I can agree that they generally are quite good. Current in particular is my favorite. I don't know if we're supposed to say favorites. Anyway, they're all good databases, that's what I'm trying to say. But they are certainly ready for the enterprise. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes of time left, and I just now said AI. So I think, actually, you beat me. You got like 33 minutes in and then said AI, which I think for technical talks in 2025 is a record. So congratulations, Sarah, like you really nailed it. No, most of these talks are supposed to say AI within the first 5 minutes or everybody walks out the door, right? But this can be a powerful combo for AI for a couple different reasons. Like one of them, in an environment where you're explicitly deleting nothing, right? To keep everything, you have a complete history of change. Like you're thinking in terms of like data persistence only in change, and you're never getting rid of anything. You have maximized the amount of data that you have available to feed back into these data-hungry AI systems, right? Like you've left nothing on the floor, you got it all in one place, and you can use that for, I don't know, training LLMs if you're doing this at like that kind of scale, right? Or just, creating stores that can then be interrogated other ways, like, I don't know, like RAG style optimization, right? Or just as creating like using domain events to be sort of analytic as a way of like creating evals for optimization, like all these things that happen in AI applications are depend on data, knowledge of activity, and benefit from like a more human language description of data, right? Like it's not just rows in a database. It's not just JSON documents. Like it's a named thing that happened at this time as part of this stream, right? It provides a lot of context that might otherwise be lost in other ways, sort of approaches of storing things, right? Then on the other end, a number of GraphQL platforms are sort of MCP enabled, right? It's kind of like talk to your graph idea is very alive and very functional. I don't know, has anybody played with MCP plus GraphQL from any of the major providers yet? It's like a huge topic. MCP in general, of course, a massive topic right now, but much more useful than you thought possible. You're like the time that you put in, like as was being discussed before, is like, was it Sarah was saying that like documented a well thought out schema that's well named, like it's just a huge optimizer for that. The same way like with the marketplace for components, for example, right? Taking the time to name things functionally in a way that like AIs can digest, massive, super helpful, right? But the same is also true of the like commercially available event stores, right? They're also MCP enabled. So this idea of talking to your event stream also exists, right? And I think is like a very powerful combo that potentially enables, powers, assists this sort of next generation of AI-driven applications. Right? One more like fairly exotic architectural thing, I think this probably trumps even CQRS in terms of its like oddness. Anybody familiar with vertical slice architecture? Nobody, not one? One? This is my guy over here. Okay, we'll talk later. This is a weird one. Like the whole idea here is like, so I think for generations almost of like programmers, we've been thinking in layers, right? Like layers on top of layers on top of layers on top of layers, always making onions. Don't get me wrong, love onions. But maybe there's a better way, right? So the idea of a vertical slice architecture is that you take everything, and I mean everything that's involved in implementing a feature, slice it, package it together, deploy it as one thing. And these things are small, right? It's like login process, right? And that's everything from like the UI that generates it down to the authentication. Yo.
Yeah. So when you hear say like if you're in that vertical kind of thinking, it's essentially modularity. Like if you think modularity, you have to be kind of thinking vertically.
It's like modularity on like the next level, right? Like the idea is to like decouple as much as possible each feature, right? So it's not each layer or each tier, each box in the traditional diagram. Usually the way people draw this is like a bunch of stripes and then a bunch of like vertical bars going through it, right? And at first you start thinking about it and you're like, this seems like unapproachably complex. You have to have some way of these things talking to each other, right? But when you dig into it more, like what you need, of course, your features have to talk to each other in some way. They cannot be just completely remote from each other, right? Because then you just have a bunch of micro applications, right? You got to orchestrate in some way. Like obviously GraphQL has been used to orchestrate the sort of UI data access version of this in a way that's like functionally approachable for a variety of different use cases for some time. Like this has clearly been demonstrated, right? I think people have experimented with a bunch of different ways of doing this in sort of like the data event activity tier, kind of that world, right? Personally, I think event sourcing is like, might be the right answer, right? It might be the solution that we're looking for here. We're right now doing a lot of experiments with, and I think we're actually kind of behind the game. There are others that are more advanced in their thinking here about using the simplifying constructs of event sourcing plus some enabling technologies, in this case, like event stores and CQRS and GraphQL to really achieve this, to like really build vertical slices, deploy them into like an orchestrated aggregated application, right? So yeah, these technologies together, I think, are a real enabler there. So I don't know, more to watch on that one, I guess. Okay, one last piece. All right, this has me landing exactly on time. So we've been back in the lab. I know this is kind of a low-res photo, but I loved it so much I just had to include it in the talk. Hopefully one of my kids will be doing this one day. I would love to have that library, but all right. So we're working on an idea right now where the idea is to try to help people get into this technology space, to use this combination of technologies, right, in a way that leverages investments that have already been made specifically in GraphQL orchestration, right? So it's like find a way to help people adopt without having to force them to like basically change all their application development processes to use event sourcing, which could be difficult and sort of shocking to the system, right? And get some value just out of some of the, I don't know, data options that are available here, right? So, everybody's seen this, right? We've got a federated GraphQL server. Say a bunch of mutations are coming in and they're all going to different services, right? Each one of those services is, let's just say it's a well-designed microservice. It's got its own storage. God knows what that is. One of them has MySQL. One of them has Postgres. One of them has somebody who handwrites on documents, like whatever. Just imagine like some form of persistence that's difficult to deal with, right? That's kind of typical federation, right? But what we want to try to do is, in this case, we're working specifically with Apollo and Current, just because we know Apollo's like router plugin stuff the best, and we know Current's like data surface the best. But I think this would probably work with just about any mature event store GraphQL server combination, right? Building a custom router plugin, what it does is it intercepts mutations, does a little bit of magic, a little bit of LLM, Gen AI magic to turn those mutations into domain events, which for most well-designed schemas that are based off of some reasonable domain reasoning is going to be pretty straightforward, I think, right? Throw them into an event store, right? And you might ask yourself, why? Like, why do this, right? Firstly, all of a sudden you've got everything in one place, right? Like all that data that otherwise would have ended up in all these orchestrated services, right, is now in one stream in one place, right? And it's in one place that's expressly designed for taking that data and radiating it in different interesting formats, right? And is also sympathetic to the needs of, say, MCP or AI-based interrogation, right? Now, some of you, like, you come from like the security world, you're like currently like horrified, right? Like what? I can't take all of my domain data and put it in one place. So keep in mind, this is an experiment. This is something we're trying out. And so there would need to be some controls around this, and you would probably need to be able to configure some nudges about what to consider, what to add, what to drop, right? But it is kind of an easy route towards being able to get your data formatted as domain events and into an event store in a way that you can then immediately make use of it through like agentic type interrogation or more conventional types of like storage interaction, right? So work on this, watch this space. I think in about a month we'll like put this one out in the open source world and see who picks it up. Looking for collaborators on this one as well, and people that don't mind being guinea pigs. So if you're all interested in the idea, please write yellow shirt. Would love to talk about it. Right. Event sourcing in GraphQL. It's love in the sense of compatibility, works well together, creates a lot of great opportunities. I love it. Hopefully you have at least a reasonable interest in it. I love this audience though. Oh, there you go, huh? See what I did there? Anyway, thank you for coming and listening. I know that this is like a fairly, not an obscure topic, but like a, a little bit on the fringes of what you might expect from a GraphQL specific conference. I hope I've rewarded you for your attention, which is my goal. Also, I just wanted to express my thanks to the GraphQL Federation for hosting me, to all the other speakers for putting time into being here and preparing. I know quite a lot of work goes into this, and I personally have already gotten quite a lot out of it. Mike, I'm from Xolvio. That's our website right there if you like QR codes. I'm going to be all around week, and I look forward to lots of conversations on this and many other topics. Thanks, everybody.